Hello and welcome to Texas Oncology's Survive and Thrive webinar series. My name is Kelly Condon and I am the program coordinator here at the Texas Oncology Foundation. We are so thankful to have Nicole Hodak leading our discussion today on budget-conscious meal planning. I want to take a moment just to thank Texas Oncology for their continuous support. Survivorship programming would not be possible without their partnership. And just to give those of you who are new to our program a little bit of background about our foundation, the Texas Oncology Foundation is dedicated to providing support to cancer patients in the communities where they live, work, and receive treatment. Survive and Thrive programming is just one of the ways that we are active in communities, providing both resources and support to all involved on the cancer journey. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping announcements with you. Hopefully this will help your experience on GoToWebinar run smoothly. If you have questions, please feel free to submit these at any time during the webinar. There is a question tab on your control panel. Should appear on the right side of your screen. If you are viewing along with others, please designate a scribe to submit your group's questions. We plan to respond to all questions after the presentation, so please keep them coming. If you are experiencing any trouble, such as windows disappearing or your slides don't seem to be advancing, sometimes the best fix is to simply close and reopen the webinar window. If you are experiencing issues with your audio, the best solution is to call into the webinar and listen over the phone. There's an audio section on your control panel. When you select phone call, the number that you can use will drop down for you. Throughout the presentation, there will be a few poll questions. When a poll shows up on your screen, simply select your answer. The presentation will continue after answers have been submitted. We're going to take a moment and practice this. We like to know who's on this call with us. So right now you're going to see on your screen, I am a survivor, a caregiver or loved one, healthcare provider. Take a moment and respond to this, just so we know who's on the call with us today. Awesome. So we have a lot of survivors on our call today, which is really exciting. We're also thankful to have our caregivers, loved ones, and healthcare providers with us as well. Our presenter has also added some handouts for you. On your control panel, again, there is a handouts section. These handouts and resources are available for you to open, download, save to your computer during this presentation. You unfortunately will not be able to access them if you rewatch the presentation later. So please take advantage of that and download those during this session. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and the online archive will be available for viewing after this live version. The recording will be sent to everyone that registered in the follow-up email, and this will also be available on our Texas Oncology Foundation website, so please visit there afterwards as well. Lastly, I'm just going to introduce our wonderful speaker, Nicole Hodak. We are very excited that we get the opportunity to hear from her. She has recently received her board certification as an oncology dietitian, and she is with Texas Oncology Baylor Salmons Cancer Center up in the Dallas area. She has been a constant part of our Survive and Thrive symposiums. If you've ever had the opportunity to go, you've probably heard from her. And it is so evident just in interacting with her. She has such passion for patient care. And you see it through the time and creativity she invests into the programming and support she provides for those patients. And so we are so thankful to have Nicole here with us tonight. And Nicole, I'm going to let you take it over.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you all so much for taking the time out of your evening to attend this webinar. It is my hope that through the presentation, you'll be able to walk away with at least one applicable tip or answered question for building budget conscious, but also healthful meals. What I'll cover today is a number of different things. I want to talk a little bit very briefly about what is healthy. I cover in a number of the symposiums, excuse me, and last year in the first webinar that we did, kind of the AICR guidelines for what is healthy, but we're going to talk about that briefly. We're going to cover how to actually build a menu. And then we'll go over lifestyle cost-saving measures and then answering the big question of organic. So a healthy diet, what is a healthy diet? It's something that generally speaking is often defined in people's minds as one thing or another. And people tend to, put things in an eat this, not that kind of, picture frame, put things in healthy baskets or unhealthy baskets. But in reality, that's not how things go. And that's really where people get into trouble when there's no transition between, no gray area, if you will. And there are a number of different entities that put out guidelines. They establish guidelines for overall health, just for well-being, but also for specific diseases. And the dietary guideline for recommendations, or dietary guidelines for Americans, those recommendations have been established for many, many years. So back through the 70s, you remember the food guide pyramids, as well as what's now transitioned into the My Plate. And you can see here that we've not been meeting those recommendations, and namely our fruit and vegetable consumption is where we most tend to fall short. And our fruit and vegetable consumption is really kind of the basis for what we want our diet to actually look like or be abundant in, because that's the protective properties of our diet. So this is the new American plate that's put out by the American Institute of Cancer Research. And what this really consists of is 2/3 of the plate or more should be comprised of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans, and then 1/3 or less be of animal protein. So in a nutshell, this is what we call balance, but more so, we want less processed foods, less salt, less sugar, and less meat. And when I say processed foods, what I tell patients or what I tell individuals is that if you can't identify the ingredients in something without looking at that nutrition facts label, then it's probably a processed food. But we know that people, 82% of people feel that it's really important to look at labeling, and it absolutely is, because there are foods that, we buy something, for example, like a nut butter. You do have to look at the label to make sure that maybe there's not a ton of added sugar in that. But those are the things that we're looking for less of. And then, of course, we're looking for that plant-based approach, like the new American plate is demonstrating here, where we want more whole grains, we want more fruit, we want more vegetables, specifically non-starchy vegetables, and then more beans in the diet. So then the next part of what this wholesome, healthy diet looks like, I'd like to take a second to go through this poll and ask you the question, how many times a week do you think the average American eats outside of the home? All right, 54% of you got it right. The answer there is, of course, that we want our individuals to consume foods within the home, right? So we want to be eating inside of the home. And the average is 4.2 times per week. And the average American actually spends $3,000 a year dining out, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which would sound like quite a bit of money. And you might think that knowing that from 2012 to 2015 data, that is up 12.3%, you might say, well, maybe that's attributable to the inflation of food costs. But in reality, that's not the case. Only food costs within the home, so purchasing food from the grocery store to be consumed in the home is only up 1%. So it doesn't really quite pan out. It really truly is that our lifestyles are changing. And the average cost of a meal prepared in the home is only $4. And so you really can't beat that when you're looking at how do I save more money on food and do it in a healthful fashion. So let's talk about building a menu. Research finds that people who eat in their home, they actually tend to be happier, healthier, consume less sugar and processed foods. And all of that results in higher energy levels and better mental health. And time equals money. But building a menu does take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort on the front end as you're getting used to this lifestyle and this kind of habit. But consider how much time you actually spend driving to an establishment, waiting on that establishment to either serve you food or to prepare your food, even from a fast food standpoint, as opposed to a restaurant. You're still taking that time to do that and then drive home, and all of that costs you time and money. So how do we build menus? Unless you're quite the chef, chances are you're going to be relying on recipes. So the very first thing we want you to do is to get organized. You have to get organized. So build a recipe catalog. The greatest bloggers out there that are actually providing you recipes, the way that they do this is they use things like Pinterest, they use Evernote, maybe use a binder, maybe use a drawer in your kitchen that you just throw recipes into. And that's all well and good, but you do want to note as you are collecting your recipe catalog for what's going to work when you're building your menus, how that really panned out for you. So is that recipe something that the whole family enjoyed? Is that recipe something that was reasonable from a time standpoint? A lot of times recipes will say that it should take you 25 minutes to make, and maybe the chef who prepared that recipe, that is how long it took them. But a lot of times in reality, it takes an individual maybe an hour to prepare that recipe. So putting notes on your recipes will help you to get a little bit more organized for how much availability you have. And that goes into this calendar piece. You want to know what your meal pattern looks like. Often I hear about people that will buy groceries for the week. They have good intentions to eat in the home and move kind of in this direction, but they didn't really quite think through how they were going to plan their meals based on what's going on in the home, what kind of appointments they have. And then that food goes to waste. They find themselves eating out as well, and now you've spent double the amount of money on food than what you really had intended to do. So keeping a calendar will help you to kind of map out what your commitments look like socially and beyond, medically even, and then determine where you do have the time to do the grocery shopping, to do the recipe planning, to do the meal preparation. And then a menu journal is the last piece of this, in that if you keep a journal, you can actually collect, let's say, your recipe, or not your recipes, but your grocery list items. And if you have a week that you created a menu for, and that went really well, and you have that grocery list of items, you can actually save that and then reuse it again. So once you create this menu journal, you can actually start to become more and more efficient with how you recycle menus. So let's look at the what. So how do you look through recipes? You might do a quick Google search and say quick weeknight healthy meals. And sometimes those results that are being returned back to you are helpful, and sometimes they're quick and they maybe contain some processed components. But let's look at some of the what. I would first and foremost encourage buildable or shared ingredients. And what I mean by that is you can pick 7 different recipes and plan to cook all week long because you have all of these different ingredients. So let's say you have a recipe that calls for 3 carrots, and you bought a bag of carrots, and that bag of carrots now doesn't transfer to any of your other recipes, and now you've wasted the rest of that produce and have nothing to put it into. So think about ways that you can build or use shared ingredients. And shredded chicken is a perfect example of that. Beans are as well. If you plan at the very beginning of your week, or whenever your cooking time is, to use something like shredded chicken, that can transfer into a chicken salad sandwich, that could transfer into some kind of soup, that could transfer into maybe a fresh salad. And the same is true for something like beans. So think about those types of ingredients. And then bulking ingredients. So if you have an odd number of meals, so your portions that you've delivered out for whomever is in the home, be it yourself or other family members, if you have one portion left that is kind of an odd serving, if you will, using bulking ingredients, so adding a little bit more produce to that, adding something like beans to that, that's going to help to bulk up that meal. And of course, you're adding more nutrition value or nutrient density to that meal. So that way you're stretching it a little bit further, you're stretching your dollar a little bit further, because what we know is really expensive is the meat component. And again, we're looking to have less meat in our diet, because as we saw in that first graph, our meat consumption is so far above and beyond what the guidelines and the recommendations are. And don't be afraid to use frozen or canned items. Americans, we tend to be so consumed by the cost of fresh produce, and that's typically, I think, oftentimes what people really want to see in their diets, and that's great. But we do know that individuals who do include some canned items in their diet, they eat 22% more produce than the individual who doesn't use canned goods. And I think that speaks to our lifestyles, the convenience of it, and the time-saving measure of it. So don't be afraid to do that. But when you do, also know that canned items and frozen items do cost a little bit more than some of our fresh goods if we take the time to cut it up and prepare it. So do so when they're on sale, and you can actually stock up on those items, those shelf-stable or non-perishable items, when they are on sale. And then flavor. Your less expensive cuts of meat are going to take a little bit more effort, but in doing so, you can save anywhere from $3 to $5 on the pound. So for example, if you bought a whole chicken and you knew how to look up a YouTube video, for example, on how to debone a chicken, you could be saving yourself a lot of money. You have a whole different variety of meat, and you're able to use that throughout the week. Again, like I was talking about with the shredded chicken, that's a great way to do that. It may take you a little bit more time, but oftentimes these types of meats or these cuts of meat, they tend to have more flavor. So that's, that's definitely a perk as far as saving money and actually getting more enjoyment out of the foods that you are eating. And then alternate sources of protein. So don't be afraid to do less of the animal protein and include nuts, include beans in the diet, include tofu. Eggs are a really inexpensive source of protein, and that's a great way to incorporate that as a protein source into your menus. Shopping in ethnic markets. In the United States, we throw away an astronomical amount of what we call ugly fruit or ugly produce because it just doesn't look the way that we think it should. But it's still fresh, it's still healthy, it still contains all of those nutrients, and sometimes you'll actually find at these ethnic markets you have less expensive produce available there. So that's a great way to save some money. And then plan to use your freezer. I can't say enough about that. You plan to use it, but then also use it, right? So sometimes we have an excess of something that we prepared and we put it in the freezer, but then we don't, again, go back to that calendar to make the plan to take it out of the freezer and actually utilize it. So here's a sample menu that I just kind of put together. You can see here when I underlined certain nutrients or certain food items rather, they're consistent. So the whole point is to create continuity. And if you plan to do oatmeal as one of the breakfasts, for example, I was trying to give you an idea of how you could take oatmeal and make it 3 different ways for the entire week. And it's a totally different flavor each time. But the oatmeal, the big tub of oatmeal that you bought is being put to use as opposed to trying to do 7 different breakfasts, for example. And then also consider that this is a meal plan with nearly 21 different meals. If you are an individual who will eat leftovers, I would strongly encourage that you do so. So maybe you plan to only make 3 meals for the week, and that would cut down on the time that you're spending in the kitchen to actually prepare meals. And then, of course, having these freezer or fridge clean out days. The average American throws away $640 worth of food each year. And I think if any of us, somebody walked up to us in the grocery store and said, how would you feel about getting $640 off of your grocery bill? We would certainly accept it. So taking days or making space in the menu so that way there's kind of this free-for-all clean out will certainly help the budget. And then if you don't have time to do something like that, if you don't have time to kind of curate recipes or build a menu, there are people that do it for you. Through Eating Well, there's a dietitian, her name is Victoria Saver. She actually is a digital meal plan editor, and she does just that. She creates recipes that are intended to be less than $3 per serving. It takes an hour or less to make these these recipes, and then she actually produces a shopping list for you. So it's all kind of there in one nice package, so that way you can reach your goals. And not to mention, like I said earlier, you could do quick searches on quick weeknight meals that are going to save, of course, your bottom line just because you're preparing foods in the home in general. And look for things that have less ingredients. That will certainly help as well. So if you go to something like the Food Network and there are 15 ingredients with 30 spices, that's when you're going to start to really blow the budget. Aside from eating the right things and eating in the home, let's look at some of the things that can be done to impact your bottom line in a positive way. So aside from just that menu and those recipes, there are things you can do in the marketplace. There are things in the marketplace that these grocers or these these markets are actually doing to get more money from you. So one is to take your own bag. A lot of places are actually requiring 5 to 10 cents per bag. And even if you only used 10 bags a week, and you did that every week for the year, I mean, that's $26 a year. And that sounds like such a small amount. But again, like I said earlier, if somebody came up to you in the grocery store and was like, here, do you want $26 off your bill? I'm sure you'd take it. And using a smaller cart. So some of your grocers are offering that option. Research shows that shoppers buy 40% more with the larger cart. And your marketplaces, they know that. Whole Foods has actually doubled their shopping cart size in the last couple of years in a number of different locations for that reason, because they know if they give you a bigger cart, you're going to fill it up. You're going to put more items in there. And using office coffee or at-home coffee. If your office offers coffee, it's free. That's a great way to save money to help fix your budget a little bit, or just making your coffee at home, of course. And then making and taking your list. When you're doing that menu planning that we were talking about earlier, you want to review what's in your pantry, review what's in the fridge, review what's in the freezer, and then plan your grocery list based on that. So that way you're not doubling up on items that you don't necessarily need. And then using the tally marks while you shop. So I thought this was a really helpful tip, is to use, when you're using tally marks, if you buy something that's $3.20, round that up to $4. So that way you're keeping a real good track of the items that you're buying, and cost compare, from a unit price standpoint. Is it really worthwhile for you to buy that item that is giving you the quote unquote bonus value? Sometimes when you look at your unit prices, you're going to find that no, not necessarily. It actually would be more advantageous if you bought the smaller quantities and just bought multiples of that. So use your tally marks while you shop. That'll help you. And then of course, don't go hungry. You're going to veer away from your list and from your intentions. And technology, grocer apps have come a long way, certainly, and they're really there to help you. They're there to help them, of course, because they're collecting research and statistics on how their shoppers are shopping, but they certainly can help you organize your shopping trips and give you lists, saving you both time and money. So oftentimes you can clip coupons within your apps. That's certainly helpful if you have the time to do so prior to a grocery trip. And then, of course, a number of grocers are allowing you to add items to your cart. And some of that is because, they offer things like curbside pickup or, click list from Kroger. They offer, you can pull your vehicle up and they'll put your groceries in there. But when you're adding things to those carts, oftentimes what you'll find is you can actually take that list, organize it by aisle, and you could even print it out or just take, your phone with you with the app on there. And what that does is if you've added all these items in a list fashion, you're able to then walk in the store, know you're going to go to aisle 3, 7, 21, and 25, and then be out of the grocery store with exactly what you need and nothing else distracted you along the way. And there are apps now too that are coupon apps or reimbursement apps. Ibotta is a good example of this. You can actually load your receipt into this app and they will review it, and within a few days they'll actually look to see if you could have saved money on the items that you purchased, and then they will reimburse you. And once you reach a certain dollar amount, you'll actually get money back for that. So really it's just the effort of taking a picture of your receipt and putting it into an app, and it's free money essentially. And then scan and go, I think we're going to see a lot more of this as time goes on, where you are able to scan your items and it's tallying up for you as you're going through the store just how much you've been spending, and ultimately it will change the way we actually check out in our marketplaces. Texas produce and availability is of great importance. Again, so when it comes to saving money, we want to make sure that we're buying foods that are in season. If you're buying something that isn't in season, it's going to cost you money because it took time for someone to put it on a boat, plane, truck for a long haul, and the gas and the employee and all of the overhead that costs. So buying in season is of great benefit to you from a cost standpoint because it is in season. Moreover, the soil is, it contributes to freshness because those items that are out of season, they're typically imported. And so they're picked before they're fresh. And so it's not exactly ripe. And then there's this ripening that happens in transport, and there are actually nutrients lost within a certain time point of harvest. So having produce that is of season is of great importance. And another thing to keep in mind is that if you are the type of person that enjoys something year round, you might consider taking the opportunity to prep that item and again, utilize your freezer. Or if you were to do something like canning, you could save those items and then use those, of course, year round. But this chart comes from gotexan.org, and this is a great thing to kind of have in the home, on the fridge, or something that you take to the grocery store so you kind of know where your produce stands year round, what's in season. So this is a question that I get asked about a lot. And I think we hear a lot of promotion of organic foods. There are some people that are just, they're very convicted that organic foods is what we should be focused on. And 4 out of 10 adults say that at least some of the food they eat is organic most of the time. And 75% of Americans feel it is really important. Even if they're not doing it, 75% of Americans feel that it's important. But what does the science say? But before we get there, I want to know which of the following is not characteristic of certified organic. And I guess I have my answer on the screen, don't I? So let me, don't look. Here we go. And again, this is which of the following is not characteristic of certified organic. Okay, and the correct answer is actually free of fertilizers. And so here is the breakdown of what is the difference between conventional farming and organic farming. Conventional farming is really synthetic, meaning that it's produced from an unnatural source. Synthetic fertilizers are part of the conventional farming methods, but there are natural fertilizers. We use things like manure and compost, and all of that is to provide feed for the soil and plants. Insecticides are, of course, used to reduce pests, but we can also use things like complementary insects and birds, matting disruption, traps. Herbicides are, their intention, of course, are to manage weeds. And so in organic farming, we would use something like crop rotation, tilling, mulch. And then lastly, the use of antibiotics and growth hormones versus organic feed and outdoor access, all of which is trying to do things like enhance growth or be preventative measures for disease minimization. And what makes all of this a little more confusing is that the labeling of organic foods is not as clear to the public. So you see this seal a lot down here at the bottom. That's the USDA certified organic seal. And what that means is that 95% of the ingredients in that food product meets their guidelines, at least 90%. Of course, if it says 100% organic, it does have to be 100% organic. But there are these other terms or this other language that is not as clear. And when you see something that says it's made with organic, they're talking about 70% of the ingredients. But if it just says organic ingredients, less than 70% of those ingredients are made from organic. So that could be anywhere from 10, 20, 30%. And so how organic is that? And there are so many items, food items, that are flooding the market with organic claims. And if somebody were to investigate, the infraction can be upwards of $11,000. And while that may seem like a lot of money to a major corporation, it really isn't. And because there are so many items flooding the market, I mean, can the FDA really investigate every single food item that's making a claim? Of course not. So it's not as clear. But Where the concern comes in regards to cancer is, three components of conventional farming. There are three chemicals in particular: glyphosate, which is an herbicide, malathion, which is a pesticide, and diazinon, which is an insecticide. Each of these have been linked to one cancer or another, particularly prostate cancer, lung cancer, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But it has come to light from agricultural settings. So it's occupational exposure that these have come to light in their association with these types of cancer. It's not through pesticide residues on our produce or in our foods that it's been attributed to that, but they've been labeled as a group 2A carcinogen, which sounds alarming, and it should, because that means that it's a probable carcinogen. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer puts out these different group classifications. But what I want to say here is that there are things in that group 1, for example, that are known carcinogens, and the sun is one of those. And that doesn't mean that we go out to our vehicles or go outside every single day and our risk of cancer is astronomical because we have exposure to the sun. So I think that's important to actually take away from that, take away from these categorizations. I think we create a lot of fear around some of the chemicals that are found in these groups as carcinogens, but it's really, a lot of this has to do with dosing. So how much exposure are we really talking about? And 90% of the population have detectable pesticides in their urine and blood. And they have done crossover trials. So we've done crossover trials where you see individuals who are consuming an organic foods diet, and they cross over to a conventional foods diet, and we actually do see a shift in the amount of pesticides that are found in the urine and the blood. So it is attributable to what we're taking in. But there are other exposures other than food that have been taken into account. And like I talked about, agricultural farming is one of them. Until now, and I mean until now, October 22nd, a article was published in JAMA, and it was the very first one of any real quality study design, although it still has some limitations to it, that actually looked at organic food consumption from a prospective standpoint with a 5-year follow-up and its association with cancer. And the conclusion was that they found that more frequent consumption of organic food was inversely associated with the risk of cancer. So meaning that it was protective. And they used 16 categories of foods, and they established a score based on how often the individual would consume those foods. And this author actually did a study back in 2012 where it was over 600,000 French individuals, and they asked them the very basic question of whether they were consuming organic foods or not. So that really kind of limited the strength of that study, certainly, because it just asked that question. And like I said earlier, most people find it's important, and 4 out of 10 adults do consume some foods, or even most of the time, organic foods. And so that really just didn't quite pan out as far as the strength of that conclusion of that study. But this was a little bit stronger. But however, if you've ever done any type of food frequency questionnaires, it's really difficult to say with certainty just how strong that association is, for a number of reasons. One being that these individuals were volunteers, so that may lead to some kind of bias. And in addition to that, we know that they didn't do any type of testing as far as the urine and the blood goes. So there really should have been some type of testing to corroborate what the individuals were saying as far as how frequently they consumed those foods. Because these individuals were volunteers, and so maybe they are more inclined to say that they ate this way more frequently or more often. So this is the first study that we've seen. Certainly it shouldn't be discounted. There just definitely needs to be more research and more literature on the subject of how much individuals are consuming organic diet and how that is attributable. But like I said, this is certainly a step in that direction, but it's just not the whole answer. And as I always say, you can't, and not just me, but really you can't just take one study and project that on evidence-based guidelines for whether we tell people to consume organic foods or not. So what we do walk away with is the environmental working group does have 2 classifications two produce classifications. They call them the Dirty Dozen and they call them the Clean 15. And what they do is they look at the pesticide residues on our produce, and those that are the most quote unquote dirty, that's your Dirty Dozen, they have the greatest concentration of pesticide residues. And so in this case, if you are to be buying organic foods, this is where you definitely want to spend your money. But then the Clean 15, they tend to be most free of pesticide residues. And so considering conventional produce is a great opportunity there. And so the takeaway, of course, that all carcinogens are dose dependent, like I mentioned with the sun. And so we just really have to think about what are the benefits of consuming a conventionally grown produce diet. And it's really that those benefits far outweigh the risk of pesticide exposures, especially when it comes to being budget conscious. So it's not something that we're recommending that individuals do really focus their time and effort on organic food consumption. So what I really hope that you take away from all of this is that we want you to plant your whole plan. I want your diet to be more, fruit and vegetable based, whole grains, legumes, that sort of thing. And then of course be whole, so less processed foods. If it's boxed, bagged, or canned, or if you can't identify the ingredients, we certainly want those things to be more whole. And so shifting over to doing a little bit more of this menu planning, of course, right, is gonna actually set the foundation so that way we can do these things, that way we can change the lifestyle, so that way we can take that step in the right direction. But even if you walk away with today and put into action, of course, one of the strategies in this session, you're taking a step in the right direction of less processed foods and more money in your pocket, all of which, of course, will equal a healthier and hopefully happier you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nicole.
Absolutely.
At this time, we are going to step into a Q&A portion of our presentation. I've had a few questions come in, but if you have some, please continue to utilize your question tab on your control panel, and we will get to those questions as well. So early on in the presentation, you were talking about the benefits of preparing and eating at home, but you also mentioned that you recognize this is a time commitment. So what is your perspective on like Snap Kitchen and places like that that do prepare the meals? Like, where does that fall between, home cooked and eating out restaurants as far as healthy choices go?
Snap Kitchen, is that what you said?
Yeah, it's places like Snap Kitchen, or I'm trying to think of a few others that I've seen. Just.
Are you talking about like a Blue Apron or?
Like Snap Kitchen, they prepare the meals and you're able to go pick them up and then you bring them home and warm them up.
Oh, okay,
Like,
gotcha.
where does that fall on like the healthy choice line?
I think the question then would be, how are they preparing the meals? So I'm not familiar with Snap Kitchen directly, but I would certainly be looking at what's actually being provided, right? So if it's predominantly plant-based, if it's predominantly whole grains, that sort of thing, that's what you want to be looking for. And two, just inquiring. So I know I said if you can't identify the ingredients, then it's probably processed. But in that type of circumstance where you're not preparing the foods, you might ask to see kind of some nutrition facts label, especially because the guidelines are changing on that, where we can see things like how much added sugar is in this food item, or what the sodium content of that is. So it would just really depend on how they prepare the meals. Unfortunately, I don't have experience with Snap Kitchen to say my perspective on what their nutrition facts labels look like. But those are some things that I would be looking at in regards to where that falls. But certainly, again, it kind of goes down to the budget piece. I mean, which is what we're talking about today. But from a healthful standpoint, certainly it can fit as long as it's within those guidelines.
Yeah. And then just, these were kind of bundled together, but just thinking about kind of like grocery store myths almost, if you will. we've heard if you stick to the outside aisles, you're making like wiser, healthier choices.
Yeah.
What is your perspective on that?
So it's interesting that you say that because your grocers actually know that there is this ideology that if you stick to the outside of the grocery store, that you are going to stick to healthier items. And of course, your big box corporations are, in the middles, right? So, but because your grocers know that, they are changing their layout. And like I mentioned earlier with the apps, they're using a number of different things. They're using your apps while you're in the store, especially if you have location, to track how people shop through the store. They use things like hotspots too. So kind of they measure heat sensitivity, just like where people are kind of corroborating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're doing that, and they're also they're using their cams, right? So their store cams to kind of see what the traffic looks like through their stores, so they can not only make the environment a little more friendly, but also so that way you might peruse or leisurely kind of go through your store. Now you have Starbucks in there and that's on the outskirts, right? So,
Yeah.
but it's also that way you are really enjoying the experience and spending more money there. And that's why I say, use those apps to your advantage and organize, your aisles so you are in and out, you are not distracted, because that is changing the layout.
Uh-huh. And then kind of another like grocery store myth, I guess. People have been trying to eat more organically. And I've heard people say if it has a peel or a skin, it's safe. Like you don't need to spend the extra few cents to buy organic. Like it's safe to eat. Is that a good rule of thumb just to have in the back of your head as you shop?
You know, I've heard this, but we have to remember that a lot of this gets into the soil, and our soil is what provides nutrients and transports some of those nutrients or chemicals or pesticides into the food. So it may be true, like from the outside of what's being sprayed, you may actually lessen the residue, but you are still going to have some exposure. But that's where that comes back to that conclusion. I think we create a lot of fear around our produce, but the reality is we don't have anything to suggest right now that's even really strong to say that we should be so concerned about organic produce or taking the skin, because the skin is where we have fiber and we have other nutrients too. So the benefits of consuming these things are also very protective. We have to think about how that actually works. So to answer that question, I do think it probably lessens that some, but it's not going to be entirely.
Yeah. All right, and we've also gotten a comment/question. It says, it is tough to eat the daily recommended amount of fruits and vegetables. What do you suggest to help add more to your diet?
It is, it is if we are trying to do it from a very, let's say, fresh standpoint. So like these very basic crudités and that sort of thing. But if we're incorporating them into meals, it can happen really quickly. If you incorporate it into a breakfast. So for example, you could make, like a quiche, for example, and that could be a really easy breakfast that you incorporate over the whole week. It's something that you could heat up rather quickly and incorporate fruit and vegetables into that. I don't like to advocate for blenderizing or juicing, that sort of thing, but if time really comes to crunch down and it's truly what you would eat, meaning if you just took a little bit of ginger, an apple, maybe a carrot and blenderize that, really quickly, that provides fruit and vegetables to the diet in a small quantity that's something that you would actually eat and would complement the diet. So that way you're kind of getting to those guidelines. And like I said earlier, a big part of it is that we don't take the time to just chop something up really quick and make it accessible via the freezer or the refrigerator. So I think if we just stop in the morning and take a second to grab an apple to go with us, that way when we're hungry, we don't head over to the vending machine or downstairs to our food establishments to get the bread pudding on Fridays. Those are kind of some of the things that would certainly help us to do better in that regard.
Yes. Another comment we got says, I've heard on more than one occasion that cancer feeds off of fruits and naturally sweet products. What is your take on this?
No, and I actually, it's funny, I did another talk earlier today, and it's just the sugar feeds cancer is a gross oversimplification of how all of that works. We do want foods that have, what we consider to be of course, less added sugars, right? That's where the concern comes in, because the more added sugar that we have in the diet, that's excess calories that don't carry nutrients that are protective. And then the excess calories are attributable to excess body weight. Excess body weight is attributable to cancer risk. So it's kind of this cascade. And there's other science, to support growth factors and the like, but ultimately speaking, if we have this balanced diet, and fruit should be part of it, should it be all of your 5 servings of fruits and vegetables? No, absolutely not. It should be maybe 2 servings, and then the other 3 should come from actual non-starchy vegetables. And so that's really how we approach that.
Gotcha. And there's just one more. Whenever you were discussing the in-season produce and you shared that chart, could you repeat where they could download that?
Yeah, it's gotexan.org.
Awesome.
And I think if you can actually just search in their search bar and just type in Texas produce availability chart, it'll come up.
Awesome. And then maybe I'll just take that off of your PowerPoint, and if anybody needs it, I can just email that to them as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. It's actually a PDF too, so I can send it to you.
Oh, fantastic. That's even better. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for just taking some time with us tonight. If there's no other last minute comments you have, Nicole, then I will wrap us up.
No, I thank you all so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for participating with us this afternoon. Stay connected with the foundation, visit our website, like us on Facebook, some upcoming events that you can be looking out for. We are continuing our Survive and Thrive symposiums, and in the spring, we will be in San Antonio, Longview, Austin, and Waco. So keep up with us, and as more information comes out on those events. Our next webinar is on Thursday, December 13th, and Vanessa Pettijohn with Texas Oncology South Austin. She's a social worker there. She's going to be discussing with us the fear of reoccurrence, talking about moments that might trigger our fear, some coping skills, and ways to help us become unstuck and start moving forward. As we bring this webinar to a close, a survey is going to open on your screen. Please take a moment to provide us with your feedback from today's presentation and leave us comments on topics you would like to see covered in the future. Thank you all again. Thank you, Nicole, and everyone, and have a great evening.